All right, I think we can get started. So I'm going to present A Player Has No Name. So a little bit about me. I play games, as you can see with my picture. I love pets. And I am a yogi. I teach yoga. I'm passionate about it. And one of the things about yoga is the identity crisis, right? Who am I? Am I this body? Am I this mind? And that kind of correlates with I do in ID product. So I'm the product manager in electronic arts for trust and safety. So we'll move forward. So whenever we play games, the first thing we need to ask the player is, hey, can I have your name? And most of the players are going to say that a player has no name. So predominantly what it means is we get as little information as possible from the players. And part of the reason why that is how many of you play games, first of all? Okay, so that many of you play games. How many of you are considering yourself as gamer? Very few, right? So there is a research which was done, it was done like 5 or 6 years back, wherein there is this identity crisis within the gamers themselves. They don't want to identify themselves as gamers. Like only 20% of the respondents say that they would call themselves as gamers socially, right? And that's because of various social reasons and other aspects. So the gamers themselves would not say gamers. And when we go and ask information which is real to what we want in game, it is very, very complicated, right? So eventually what happens is we build this identity system in gaming, and it's not related just with electronic arts, I believe, in any of the gaming, is that identity, digital identity becomes really complex. And when an identity is complex, then you can think that the securing those identity becomes really, really challenging. Okay, so that goes into my agenda for today. We're going to talk about progression in the game identity from no name to some name, and then perhaps we can get some KYC about our players. We'll talk about threats and impact, about gaming, current situation in security. We'll talk about some of the methods we use in the account security space, how the gaming industry is trying to protect the players around player accounts, and the challenges and conclusion. So we'll do some takeaways as to what we think. And I'm sure there are some people over here who might think that you would be able to solve that for us. So we can talk about it in our networking event, if any. So let's go into the progression of the game identity. So 3 colors, I know it's a little bit bright, but red, yellow, and green is basically how the game identity kind of progresses. And I want to call them as, you start with the weak identifiers and how you identify a player, going into limited identifiers with some limited scope, right? And then you go into some sort of consistent identifier about a player. This is more about identifying a player, right? And then there are different use cases when we transition this from one phase to the other phase. But eventually we want to get to the green part, right? That's where we want to be. So let's talk about the device identifier or the weak identifiers as to what it means in the gaming world. As you can see in the pie chart, and this is basically based on the revenue which gaming industry does, and this is very recent, 52% of the revenue, the large part of share is the mobile, right? And in mobile, when we talk about device, they are the vendor ID or the advertising ID, right? And GID and JID, which we say in the Google, Android. In Xbox and PlayStation, Nintendo, name about the console platform, the share is around 28%, still very relevant. And then the console platform has relatively good confidence in the identifier they provide. So that is really strong in the weakest identifier, I would say. And the PC is the weakest of all within the identifying, right? So if you have a MAC address and all, it's very, very easy to spoof a PC. But folks were thinking the PC gaming is going to go die, but still very strong, and it's stronger as it was before. 20% is still there. So when we talk about, getting only the identifier of a device to understand a player, what does it mean for the game features? What it means is you can make cross games. So for example, if you're playing on your iPhone on your device, 2 games, using your device identifier, I would know that you have 2 games being played on that device, right? So you can do cross-game analysis and cross-game feature sets. But the moment you go from an iPhone to an iPad or to an Android device, then I lose you, right? Then I'm getting a different device identifier. So I can't do cross-device. And I can do cross-platform. And cross-platform here would mean you're playing in a mobile, and then you also play in console. can I match you up together? Can I understand you as a player? Right? And I have some anecdotes in below over here, which kind of tells that. And I believe in ping identity. Andrew talked about it, right? Like everybody would have a device, and you can identify that user or a player with a device. There are more devices than humans right now. So let's look at some of the use cases and as to why we would even look at the device IDs. One is certainly about tracking, right? And it is becoming harder and harder for the gaming industry to track a player based on their advertising ID. As you know, Apple just came up with changes in their advertising policies. Now, the players or the users would have to manually explicitly say that they agree to share cross-application identifiers. So tracking IDs are used as kind of a probabilistic identifier just to find out, about some analytics or maybe trying to do some targeted advertising and such. And then there is another use case which is about trying to find a lifetime value of a player across devices, across games. That could be done through device IDs like IDFV. Again, it depends. On mobile, we have a relatively less confidence, but on console, we have more confidence on that device. And then if you ever played a mobile game, the moment you install that application or the game, you can just jump into that game, right? You can just play that game. And that is facilitated by the device ID. So that would mean that no friction to the player or the user. You can come and just play the game. So what we use is device ID to save the game state, right? Then you leave that game, come back again on the same mobile device, we will try to load the same game back again. So the game teams use the device identifiers to store the game state as well. And I have a data, like only 15% of the users actually do the opt-in right now on tracking. So we'll move to the next part of it, which is basically the limited identifiers. So as you can see, it's becoming more and more complex, right? So games are played in different devices and different platforms, but games are also experienced using game-scoped identity. And what it means is some of the game teams, they would use the gaming platform to log in. For example, if you have a single-player game on Xbox, you would allow the user to log in with your Xbox gamer tag, and then you build all your game state and all the game mechanics around it. And then you have fragmentation within that, PlayStation, Nintendo, Steam, and you go with that, right? So what does these allow us? These allow us to do some analysis around cross-device. So if you were to analyze a player on Xbox, you can do that across the devices for Xbox because you're using the same gamer tag in different devices, right? So you have Xbox One or Xbox 2, and then if you use the same gamer tag, I'm able to do that analysis across game. But you can't do cross-platform. So if you want to play with the player in PlayStation and you are Xbox, then you can't use that Xbox game ID to interact with the players or understand that player, right? So it's still limited. The scope is really limited.
Is that because the same console is multi-user shared?
That's because, if you use an Xbox gamer tag, that's only in the ecosystem of Xbox, right? So if you have a PlayStation user, you will not be able to find out if it's the same player or if a different player. And it is very recently with Fortnite, cross-platform is a thing now. Earlier, they were kind of sandbox. They were trying to keep a network within themselves, right? That network has opened up, which is actually allowing you to socially engage more players, right? You can make more friends. So if your friends are on PlayStation, you can add them into your game and be able to play with them. So that's the limitation of the, the IDPs per se in gaming, right? So Xbox. And the others, like YouTube, we have streaming, we have other kind of use cases wherein you identify yourself and come into the game with those identities too. What are the use cases? I kind of touched upon it. Cross-device game saves, which I talked about, which is used. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I wanted to ask about the social media logins. Wouldn't that be able to be used for cross-platform, like if you log into the same social media account on Xbox and PlayStation?
Yeah. The challenge with that is you need to have the same social media and across all games, all platforms. So for example, if you have Facebook for Android and iOS, that works. But what about a game in Xbox, right? So it's difficult. And I will get to that when I get to the consistent ID. But good question. This is one of the challenges we have. So to your point, right, it is deterministic. So social like logins or login using platform logins are deterministic. But the problem is you can't have that across all the games and all platforms. Then comes the publisher ID. And this is where EA, our identity, comes into play, right? And if you have played Fortnite or any other games, you would have heard about epic IDs and such, right? So this is a need of gaming, right? Earlier, when the games were built, they were built in a very closed ecosystem. So if you have Xbox, most of the players are playing Xbox. The publisher identity was not as important, right? The identity of the platform provider was more important. With cross-platform, cloud gaming and such, now it is becoming even more important for publishers like us to create identity services and security so that we can support those feature sets. And this is the one which actually allow you a cross-game, cross-device, and a cross-platform, everything together. But we do have challenges, right? Because it brings friction. Because the player is already identifying themselves with iOS, with Apple sign-in, right? Player is already identifying themselves with Xbox, and now you want me to tell, hey, give me your email address for EA. So that becomes a friction for the players, right? So it's challenging for us, for sure. And I will touch upon that subject later. So let's go quickly into the threats and impacts based on this. Gamers are really, really a soft target, right? We've been talking about, we just had a talk, a few minutes back about how much in the government agencies we have fraud. But gaming is a big market, $178.2 billion, right? And so all the bad actors have an eye on the gaming. They want a share of that pie. So that's one. Secondly, Gen Zs and millennials, they are playing, 80% of them are playing. Predominantly, everybody is playing the games. And they are worse in protecting their account, believe it or not. They actually are, and this is the research which was recently happened, which basically tells that Gen Zs are not necessarily protecting their account. They use their social credentials, the same credentials across. And the third thing is, gaming is very social, right? And what ends up happening is, since you're trying to brag your rights and trying to brag or participate in tournaments and such, you end up sharing your personal information. So to top earning programmers actually end up providing a lot of information about them, so it becomes easier for the hackers to social engineer them. So with that, some of the common attacks, this is nothing news, as you must have heard, phishing and account peeking is the largest of all which happens within the gaming. And guessing the login information about the player could be with variety of different things, either the brute force attacks or dictionary attacks or credential stuffing. But this happens all the time within the gaming. And we actually see a lot of traffic just around the account peeking. Phishing attacks are very unique in gaming. And part of it is that the gamers are not only spending money, they're spending time. Right? They are spending time, which is even more valuable to their gaming accounts. When they spend time, and also money, of course, then it becomes very lucrative for them to get victims of phishing, because now you want to earn coins, and now you want to have free coins wherever possible, right? So they fall prey into these kind of website which kind of claims that it will provide them free coins or discounted coins and such, and they social engineer the credentials, and they're able to kind of take over their account. When we look into gaming, there are different use cases in gaming, and we talk about cloud gaming. Then there is esports, which is tournaments. This is the kind of a pro thing, right? When we talk about esports, then it is at a professional level, wherein your security is also physical security too. Very, very sad incident happened in the Madden esports too. Mobile gaming is the largest part of it, and it has its own challenges. Next-gen consoles like PlayStation 5 and Xbox and the newer one coming in, they bring in their own challenges with some of the advantages in security. Augmented reality. When you have the augmented reality, you share a lot of information about your geolocation, and that becomes a different challenge, right? We are able to provide that information to the games, and if that gets compromised, then you are sharing that to the bad actors. Virtual reality, blockchain gaming, so NFT scams, and metaverse. So depending upon what type of game you are making, your security vector actually becomes really, really, really complicated. And many of the game publishers are in predominantly all of these spaces or want to be in this space. So you can kind of understand, right, from a no name wherein a player doesn't want to identify themselves as gamer, you want to have a fantastic experience for them to consume the game and be engaged to all these kind of complex metrics of game types and threat vector which happens in the gaming. DDoS attacks, gaming industry gets the most DDoS attacks than any other industry, period. So that's another thing wherein all the bad actors are really, really vested into attacking gaming industry. So what are we doing about it, and how the gaming industry is trying to protect the player accounts? And this might apply to many of the things you are doing within your own industry. Of course, the early intervention is found to be the best for protecting any account, for that matter, the gaming account more, just because the kind of demographics we have is variety of users, right? Gen Zs to aged people. Detecting them is always better. Detection is always good for the bad actors. And then, of course, once we detect, then we're preventing for the bad actors to repeat those bad activities. Some of the prevention methods which has been really, really popular is one, incentivizing player awareness to protect their account. Believe it or not, players don't protect their account even though they have spent umpteen number, I would say years and years of their time into gaming and have thousands and thousands of dollars spent. They don't. And they would require some really good incentive to give, set up their two-factor authentication and MFA. So some of the gaming industry leaders like Epic and as well Electronic Arts is trying to incentivize players. Like if you have a 2FA enabled, you'll get some free items and such. Second is mandating, right? Within the game cycle, if there is a place where you're trying to trade something, you basically mandate, let player know that, hey, if you want to use this part of the game, you would require to enable your two-factor authentication. And third, which is the most important, is providing the player awareness. I think this goes without saying, because most of the players don't necessarily know how important their game accounts are. And secondly, they don't think that it is going to protect their account. So the communication strategy, I think based on intervention, improves the security adoption outcomes. And what we have found through the research, this is an industry research for the Fortnite player, is it's not that players think that, hey, I would provide a TFA if you incentivize me. Most of the players say that, okay, if this is going to protect my account, I would certainly provide a two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication. So it's not necessarily that players want free goodies to protect their account. It's just that they are not aware that this is going to protect them. And those who don't, even though they know that it's going to protect, they didn't think that this option enhanced any security, and rest felt that account was not important enough to secure, right? So those are the outliers here in gaming. In detection methods, we have certainly, trying to have a machine-driven, like machine learning and AI-based kind of detecting bots, whether it is a behavioral one, keystroke-based, detecting account peaking using the login behavior. If you're time traveling or if you're trying to do it too fast, those kind of policies are there, nothing new, but that is certainly going to help us kind of find how many accounts are peaking and how we can kind of protect them. Reputation of the device, of your email address or of the player, and trying to create trust score is very predominant in the gaming industry, and I'm sure in other industry too. But apart from doing all this, indigenously within our own, what we have seen is the community-driven effort is also very important, right? A player taking care of other players, they are reporting bad behaviors, bad actors, has a very, very big impact into protecting the account. Gaming community is very tightly knit, especially if you are playing a particular game. They are very, very, very tightly knit community, and they can actually use the developer community within the players and also developer communities within the gaming industry, like Epic, Electronic Arts, and other companies kind of share information with each other to protect the community. Some of the enforcement methods we use. Of course, we challenge suspicious activity, so we can always ask player to kind of stop before they can go forward if they come from a new device and such. So we try to bring friction in between. We lock account. If we feel that some accounts are peaking, right, we will lock them and say that, hey, reset your password before you want to get in. So definitely we bring in the friction to the players. And many of the times we have to take activities on the account, we'll just ban, or we'll try to temporarily ban that account so that they had to call customer service in cases where we think that might be a compromised account. So now that we have talked about the entire umbrella of what all threats are happening, let's look at the challenges and what conclusion we can take out from this presentation. So I kind of touched on these account security challenges, specifically in gaming. I think the biggest challenge for us is the balance between security and usability and experience for the games, right? So a game can only be secured if that is used by the players and they consume it. And the session time on the mobile is so low, it's only in seconds. We need to get attention of the gamers right at the time when they download that game. So we can't afford to bring in friction to ask KYC from the players. So they need to download and start playing and be able to consume that game to the fullest if possible. That's what game developers tell us, that hey, the best identity is no identity. Don't ask anything. Let the player play the game, right? So we always have to balance that. And then, of course, the security comes in between, right? We need to have that good balance between the security and usability. Secondly, legacy. Games outlive humans. So when we build a game, that games have a great fan following, even if it is not doing good as a business, a game has a lot of sentiments attached with it. So if you bring down a game, it has always repercussions, right? It basically brings down the value of the company. So we need to have the game running for a long duration, right? So what does it mean? It means that we have legacy. So all the security policies, all the things that the game has done, the game developers kind of move on. So once the game is developed, they have basically move on to the new games, right? So all these legacy games are still there. And as we discussed, there are different platforms we support. We support the cloud platform, we support new console, we support mobile, we support all the platforms you talk about. What it means is your login endpoints sometimes are very varied, and every endpoint has a different level of security, right? So for a player who has registered with EA, that player could go into the least minimum security place and be able to compromise the most secure place in your network. And the security measure have its own limitations, right? So that MFA is kind of voluntary, and then CAPTCHA has a limited effect. There are CAPTCHA farmers. If there is a good game, you would know that there is going to be money spent on that. Takeaway for the gamers is that player awareness is important. I talked about it. Avoid social engineering. So in gaming, it is better that not sharing is kind of caring. So don't give your DOB. Maybe age is important, right? So kind of tweak that. Some of the takeaways for the developers is that the security should be done by design. So what happens most of the time is the central team is trying to make things secure, not the game developers. So we need to make sure the game developers are kind of collaborating with the security team and trying to build the game. We need to have a very conservative game authorization. That would mean that provision of the game client and servers are required where it is authorized. Avoid the cross-game kind of player authorization. And more importantly, we should always have a sunset plan for the game. That is something which the game industry is always lacking. So with that, I will end my presentation with a summary that there is no silver bullet to solve security in the gaming, but there is a silver lining. Basically, we need to make security measures which are contextual. We need to have player play a big role to secure themselves, and we need to have a developer play a role so that they are working very closely with the account security folks. With that, I thank you. And you can reach me on my LinkedIn. And I will be staying back if you have any questions, or we can network out there. Go ahead. Do we have time for questions? Okay, good.
So I think one thing that's very interesting about the gaming industry that maybe the rest of the folks here don't always deal with is you have a lot of minors, and minors playing games. You have to manage accounts for them. I have 4 boys. It's a nightmare. They can't understand what multi-factor authentication is.
Right.
So can you talk maybe just a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that's kind of, I touched about the subject about the Gen Z as to what. So one of the things what we have found is, as I mentioned, getting the age itself is a very problematic. So what happens is most of the gamers don't share their age. So the teenagers and such, they basically play as an adult, right? That's the number one. You would see that one of the trends which we have seen in the gaming industry is that more and more mature. We are seeing that younger generations are playing less, but that's not the case. It's just that younger generations are not giving us the age. Secondly, in terms of, two-factor is not the only way. There are other ways we can secure the accounts, right? So we are looking into those kind of things wherein we can challenge the user in-game through in-game messaging and such in their different device and others. But what we have also seen is teenagers usually have phone numbers as their PII, and they don't shy to share with so emails they don't have that much, but the phone number we are kind of asking as a secondary kind of method for them to kind of secure their accounts. So usually teenagers provide phone number and kind of having their experience more better. Yeah, I think that's a different problem in entirety. So there is a lot of constraint we are also, so if we are able to detect that a player is teenage, there is this construct of player controls wherein, we don't allow a players to spend. Of course, there are security policies on the fraud wherein we basically have a trend analysis as to what is your habitual purchase habits, right? Like how much you spend. If we see that you're spending more than our threshold, we'll challenge that. More importantly, we want to give control to the parents as well. So we have built up player controls wherein a parent can basically add the child in their household, and then they can control how much you can spend in a day and how much time you can spend and how much money you can spend, those kind of things. Yeah. Cool. I will stay back if anybody has more questions. Thank you, everyone.